much checking, everybody. Welcome to the Monday edition of the Orange Bloods Recruiting Hour. I'm Jeff Ketchum, and that is Chad Hastings, and it does feel like we've settled into the name a little bit as opposed to something really elaborate that is really – I guess it serves its purpose, but there is a little part of me, Chad, that looks at the Orange Bloods Recruiting Hour.
Yeah.
I want, we could name it Tom Selleck's mustache, and
we could
crazy with it. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, my idea was just too fancy, and we went with this. I wanted a recruiting show, and it was too wild, so we went with that one.
Guys, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, because if there's a breaking commitment later on tonight involving somebody that we're going to talk about today, wouldn't you want to know about it? As everybody piles into the Specs chat. Chad, we talked a lot of recruiting earlier today in House Divided. Matter of fact, the whole show was largely based on recruiting. We talked some NFL stuff, Super Bowl, whatever, but a lot of it was kind of on the notion of Texas momentum in state and whether it matters and how much does it matter. And what I wanted to do in this recruiting hour today was kind of wipe the slate clean of everything that we'd previously talked about and just kind of get into the nitty gritty of the top players in the 2025 class. That group is now the dominant class. It is nobody was really hosting official visitors this weekend as much as they were hosting sophomores and juniors and putting them on a plate to have them after the dead period, which begins at the end of this week and goes into the first week of March. This is the last time that you get a chance to get guys on campus. I guess you still can this weekend, but I thought it'd be a good time for us to just have a good steak sandwich recruiting hour where we just talk about the kids, what's going on with them, what everybody needs to know about them, and I think answer some questions along the way if people in the Specs chat want to do so.
Yeah, and it's a good – I always say sports in general is about names, but this particular thing is always about names. You want to get them in your head. You want to find out who they are and then start to follow these stories. And like you said, this now becomes the focus because what happens next Wednesday will happen, but in terms of Texas and the 24 class, there's not much that's going to happen. I don't even know. Is Sark going to do a press conference? Is he literally going to do a press conference talk about him again?
Well, you do have the portal guys. So technically they signed, but it was after signing day. I have to believe there will be a press conference, but even last year's press conference turned into a state of the Orange Bloods address, if you will, right? Like it was
right.
A lot of answering questions about the different – it's a good chance, man, if you've got if you're a reporter and you have a really nerdy question – that you want to ask about the philosophical approach of the program and who are the behind the scenes guys, it's a great chance to kind of ask some really nerdy backroom type of questions, philosophical. Probably won't be a ton of individual prospects that you'd see him talking about on signing day in 9 days.
Yeah, and you get to you're probably right about it. It's going to be that group of portal guys that would have happened after signing day. And then as we talked about, probably a little discussion about Kenny Baker and the new D-line coach and the thinking that went into it and all that.
And Johnny Nansen as well. He hasn't talked about any of this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's true. But in terms of 2025, I like that we're digging into it today, but hearing your comments earlier on House Divided and some people are already getting in the chat with it, but this notion about Texas and in-state recruiting and all that stuff. One thing I wanted you to do before we jump into this top 20, when you say that you don't think Texas is recruiting in the state of Texas at whatever the level needs to be, let's say, if that's the way you would say it, give me an idea what the level is. Is there a bar every year you think of as out of these 20, Chad, I want them to be in a serious discussion for blank?
I think this comes down to ultimately the only thing I really care about is counting super blue chips.
Okay.
To me, These are the guys that are separate from everybody else. And
so so a 3-star offensive lineman is cool if he turns into something, but that's not what you're talking about when you say you got to be recruiting the best in the state.
Yeah, because when I say that, I'm really focused on about 15 kids. Like, if there's about 15 kids that really matter.
Yeah.
In any given year. Sometimes there's not even that many. So the goal in every recruiting class is to accumulate as much talent as possible. That's literally the objective. And when you look at the state of Texas, this year, Texas got about 3 out of the 15-ish guys that we would be talking about. It's not a disaster because it's Colin Simmons and it's Kobe Black and it's Xavier Filsaime, right? So you're talking about those are 3 badass guys. We literally had shows for every one of those guys.
Yeah.
Got to be an Amazon delivery right now going on. I'm here to survive the dogs in the front door. I almost don't know what to do when they're that wired.
You know what? Just volleyball clap, man. That's all you can do.
Hey, kids, maybe see if you can get the dogs to stop barking. Thank you. So it's about accumulating super blue chips. In any given year, there's between 8 and 15. You want to try to get as many of those as possible. What's the magic number? All of them. What is not the magic number? I mean, a lot of this comes down to can you do enough out of state to kind of compensate for some of this? And Steve Sarkisian's answer to that is yes. He can go out and get a Brandon Baker or a Ryan Wingo or a Wardell Mack or something like that. And it does alleviate some of the pressure to recruit in-state. But, if you get 3, you want to get 6. If you get 6, you'd like to bump that number up as much as possible. What's the sweet spot? Maybe 6 or 7, like half.
Okay.
I mean, if you're a top 5 Texas program, and I think the number is the same for Texas A&M. What does Texas A&M can recruit out of state? What would they, in a perfect world, what would they like to do? 6 or 7 super blue chips in state every single year. If you do that and you do nothing else, that's going to put you in the top 5 of super blue chips in a program across the country.
Well, let me have you clarify this from earlier because I thought it was a great point. You just mentioned those 3 guys that they got this last class. Earlier, you talked about if that 3 had been 6 in this last cycle, what does it do to the Texas class?
It makes it the number 1 recruiting class in the country. So a lot of what we're talking about is the thin margins between great and elite of the elite. Elite of the elite is what Texas A&M did a few years ago.
Right.
If Texas had signed 3 more top 10, 12-ish, if they get Terry Bussey, if they get Justin Williams, if they get, pick any of these guys. If Corian Gibson or Jonah Ajonje had committed to them, that's a number 1 recruiting class in the country. And, it's okay to say that top 5 was really, really good. There are ways, though, for this to improve. We're improving the in-state recruiting a smidge, closing on just a small handful more guys per year is what we're really talking about. Because once you get outside the top 15, top 20, it's the same as talking about like a top 200 guy. There's not a real difference between number 25 and number 125. The value of those prospects at that level are roughly the same. We're talking about the real difference makers. And I don't think Texas as a whole the program, had a real problem in the most basic terms possible. If you look at like top 50, top 100 signings, Texas is in first. Texas signed a large number. Texas is at the top of anybody's rankings when you talk about rankings at that level. Recruiting the state of Texas from a level that expansive, not an issue. The goal, though, is to sign elite of the elite players. Those are the ones that, quite frankly, get you into the playoff. And the reason you start citing the reasons why Texas played in the playoff this year, rattling off a lot of super blue chip prospects, is a big reason for how that happened. And it's the biggest reason moving forward. You think that Texas is in a great position to be in the playoffs in 2024 and beyond, because when you look at the roster at the highest of the high-end blue chip talent, Texas has the fourth most in the country right now, behind Ohio State and Georgia are kind of in their own tier right now. And Alabama and Texas are in their own tier right now. They're almost virtually the same when you look at the volume of super blue chips that the two programs have. This coming after Alabama was rated, and it fell from the number one school in the country in super blue chips all the way down to third or fourth, depending on the dynamics that you're looking at. But it is it's, at like basic raw numbers, it's almost like not quite a third of the talent on the roster went out the door, both with, mostly through the portal, because the thing is, your guys go to the NFL and those guys get replaced in a recruiting class. So once you get to a certain point, the numbers are washing themselves out unless you take it on the chin through the portal, which is something that happened both to Alabama and Texas A&M.
All right, so as we go through this discussion, we're going to take a look at the top 20 guys in this 25 class and kind of go through each one, and you're going to fill everybody in on kind of where you see the recruitment as of today?
Yeah, it's an educational course on some of these names. I think the mainstream Texas fan is going to know. Dorian Moore is a guy that has been hard to ignore. He committed to LSU just a couple of days after Colin Simmons. Everybody knows that he's a total badass. There's that guy, but then there's the other guys in this class that maybe a lot of people haven't been introduced to. This will be an opportunity for a lot of people watching the show to be introduced to some of the conversation around some of these prospects. The difference is, the thing I think that's of note is I did this on Orange Bloods today. And the thing is, you get through the top 20 and you're like, well, damn, that wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be, which led to a lot of the conversation that we had on House Divided today about the reaction to where Texas is right now in 2025. Mm-hmm. We talked about all of the different ways that one could react to this discussion. Now we're kind of having the discussion that created the reaction that we've already talked about. So it's a little reverse in the way that we've approached discussing all of this in one day. But yeah, today is kind of this. I wanted to save it for the recruiting hour because this is kind of designed for the nuts and the bolts and the names, and it's a little nerdier. It's very specific in terms of talking names and specific schools and directions of recruitments.
All right. So would you rather go 11 through 20 and then work our way up, or would you rather go top 10 and work our way down?
No, we'll go 1 and work our way down. And again, if you want to get your questions in, by all means, jump in at any point as we're talking about specific recruits. And we'll just have a good old conversation with it today. Let's start at the top.
All right.
If we look at, I've got Blake, he's got the graphic set up so that everybody can kind of see the names that we're talking about. This is the current Rivals.com top 20. My list is going to be updated, I think, this week. It's not wildly different than this. There are a few names. For instance, I've got Lance Jackson, the Texas commit, at number 12. He's not in this Rivals top 20. the lists are constantly evolving. These 10 guys, though, I promise you, they're not going anywhere.
Gotcha.
The thing is, people like to think that the rankings, they don't change a lot at the top. Guys that are like in the top 5, it's about what is the order of that top 5 and not necessarily these guys are going to fall and there's going to be new guys. I mean, I hate to say that the rankings are set, but in a lot of ways, we know who the big war daddies are, and we know them very early. The number 1 war daddy in the state chat is Dorian Moore, the wide receiver from Duncanville, committed to LSU.
Yeah.
Been committed to LSU for basically 6 months. The thing that I think for Texas fans that's disappointing about this is I think there was a sense that, okay, well, Moore's committed to LSU. And Blake, you can drop that back down and we'll just, when we're done, we'll go back in. We'll go back and forth on this. I think the thought process was, okay, Moore's committed to LSU, but Texas will have a big season. LSU won't. We'll have the Duncanville thing going on, right? We got guys on the field from Duncanville. We got Colin Simmons working it. Once we get to the other side of 2024, we'll just take Dorian Moore from LSU. The disappointment that exists is that it hasn't quite worked out that way. Texas had the season that it wanted. LSU didn't have a big year. You put Colin Simmons to bed in the sense that he's already on campus at Texas. And yet it feels like the Longhorns are further away from taking Dorian Moore away from LSU than they were 6 months ago. And I think the thought process was these things will all go in our favor, and surely this recruitment will open up. Texas has some real work to do. Like, that kid is as committed to LSU today, seemingly as he was the day that he committed. So, you know, if I was putting like a mortgage payment down on it right now, I'd put it on him to stay at LSU. Now, that doesn't mean that Texas can't change the dynamics in his recruitment, but he's far from flimsy right now in terms of discussing him and LSU.
How much of this for you, Catch? Maybe this is a bit of a silly question, but since he is a Dallas area kid and LSU, like you said, LSU didn't have the most fantastic season they could have hoped for, but they did have the Heisman Trophy winner, and they certainly had an offense that could do some things. But for you, how much of Dorian Moore's commitment has you impressed with what Brian Kelly is doing in Baton Rouge, and how much of it could be something else?
Well, I think it's a great question. It's not a bad question. I think it's actually a really good question because Brian Kelly surprisingly has more excitement amongst kids in the high school recruiting community. But, you know, like, guys, LSU hasn't fallen really a ton in recruiting. And I think there was a sense that when he came over from Notre Dame, we all laughed at some of the early videos and the fake accent and all of the things that he was doing.
They like that he can dance, Catch. They like the dancing.
The Kelly dance moves.
Yeah.
He's been able to keep LSU's momentum going. And give him credit. Like, I think he deserves a lot of credit. Texas has everything going for itself right now. And Brian Kelly has it going good enough that they can take the number 1 prospect in the state of Texas in the August before that junior year. And when the number 1 school in Texas, sorry, Chad, but right now Texas is in that position. They're, you know, I think Texas fans would tell you they never lose that position, but A&M fans would argue there have been times in the last decade where it felt like A&M was making its move. Texas is in the playoffs. They've got everything to offer. They've got it cooking in Duncanville now, and yet Texas hasn't quite been able to knock those walls down. You don't do that unless you've got, if you're LSU. And I know LSU fans, I know a lot of LSU fans, Chad, and oftentimes they don't know what they think of Brian Kelly. They haven't figured it out yet. They don't love him. They respect him. And it feels like they don't always know, like, if they're straddling the fence, which side the other leg may swing to. But man, I would say this: he's good. He's doing a really good job in recruiting. And I told you, of the 9 kids in the state of Louisiana last year, LSU signed 8 of them. So he's doing a good job of, for the most part, locking down the LSU borders. And obviously they're really competitive in Texas. So kudos to Brian Kelly. Who knew?
Yeah, no, it's a big one. It is big. We had somebody jumping in on the chat and asking Sanchez versus Moore again in state. They're gonna run it back.
They could.
Dorian Moore and Devin Sanchez met for the state title last year. And right now, Rivals has Sanchez sitting at number 2. And did I see it right? Ohio State for Sanchez?
Yeah, pop that back up there, Blake.
Right.
When we get a chance, we'll move on to the second player in the state, and it is Devin Sanchez. And I think, look, 3 of the top 10 kids in the state right now, according to the current Rivals rankings, are committed, and they're all out of state. So none of them are to Texas. So there is hey, what's going on? And the funny thing is, Chad, we're going to go through this top 10, and there's not going to be a consensus. There won't be one kid's recruitment that's a little bit like the others. So when we're done and we're like, man, Texas may not be leading for a lot of guys in the top 10, what's the problem? And the thing that I told you earlier is there's a trend that's a couple of years in the making right now, but there's not enough data points in one direction to suggest that there's a real reason for the trend. For instance, I'm going to get into some of the dynamics of the guys throughout the rest of the top 10, and some of this stuff is out of your control. If there's a kid in the state who's from the state of Ohio and he just moved to Texas, and that kid wants to go to Ohio State, that's not something you're ever going to encounter again. And yet it counts as a data point, and it counts as a guy that's one of the top prospects in the state. Look, there's not a whole lot of reasons to talk about Devin Sanchez. He didn't care about Texas. It's kind of crazy because 14 months ago, Texas was the betting favorite. Then, like in December of 2022, it was as if Texas was no longer in his top 5. He never mentioned really Texas again. He started visiting the hell out of Ohio State. That's where he's committed. It's hard to see that shaking. And if it does, boy, Texas would have a lot of work to do because they weren't even a finalist for Sanchez when it was all said and done. The number 3 player on the state, or in the state. And this guy might be the best player in the state. He is so good. And oh, by the way, he plays baseball, and he's really good at baseball. And Dustin McComas, if he was with us right now, could do a dissertation on why this guy may be a baseball player instead of a football player in terms of professional, in terms of, this guy could get drafted really high. So he's definitely a draft prospect to watch. But Jonah Williams out of Galveston Ball, the 5-star safety who could be a linebacker. He's such a unique player that he even was on Twitter this weekend asking people what he thought his best position was, linebacker or safety. The Longhorns are at least getting mention from Jonah Williams right now, but he's been leaning to Texas A&M for a while. There's a sense home is really important to him. A&M is kind of has a home field advantage factor with being that he's from Galveston Ball. It's not a huge difference, but he's been to A&M the most. And even, and look, they've been able to withstand the coaching turnover. He's always just seemed like an A&M lean. If you're Texas, man, you cannot let that matter. You got to get this kid on campus and start somewhere. Oklahoma got him on campus this weekend.
Okay.
So that's a big win for Oklahoma because that kid can choose anywhere in the country really where he wanted to go right before the dead period kicks in. He's been to A&M. He's gone to Oklahoma. it's probably safe right now to call those the top two. Texas just got to get him on campus and like start chipping away at that. And that's where Sark and his staff are really good. They weren't really in it with Xavier Filsaime early on. And yet in December, they get the 5-star to flip from Florida to Texas. You wouldn't have guessed that 3 months, 4 months before it happened. And yet it happened. Texas has kind of they got a lot of ground to make up with Jonah Williams. The good news is he sounds like a guy that wants to give Texas a chance. He's talking about, I'm going to visit Texas. When Texas gets him on campus, they really need to make that count.
Yeah. Every time I hear you talk about him, Catch, I can tell how much you like him when I hear you guys breaking him down. And I've watched a little bit of the film. He is impressive. Just because it's that high school, I'll ask, do you think, is there any, is the A&M connection in part maybe like a Mike Evans thing? Like that was Mike Evans high school. I mean, is that still, that's still a while ago though. Do you think there's still some kind of a connection because of a big time guy like that?
It may be less that and more that, I mean, once upon a time, Casey Hampton was from Galveston Ball.
True. Yeah.
That's a long ass time ago, man. I had hair back then.
Yeah. Right.
And, Texas really hasn't been in it for a Galveston Ball guy in a long time. Even, and this kid, Jonah Williams wasn't even born, what I'm about to say, when Lawrence Richardson was a guy back in Chance's class in 2000.
Yeah.
Again, this predates.
Yeah.
This predates Jonah Williams. That's like one of the last Galveston Ball Texas recruitments that I can think of. And I don't think I can't remember if Lawrence Richardson even took an official visit to Texas. So it may not be that Mike Evans played at A&M, but I don't think that hurts. Yeah. I think it may be Texas hasn't really had a presence at Galveston Ball in a long time. So other than Casey Hampton, I don't think there's a lot of burnt orange influence to say, hey, you want to check out UT. I think that it's one of those schools. And look, they haven't had a lot of guys over the years that Texas has recruited. It's just, again, a little bit of, we're going to talk about a lot of guys and the Jonah Williams recruitment, kind of the pieces and the aspects of it will be different than everybody else that we'll talk about. One name to get excited about, the number 4 guy on the Rivals list, and he's already rated as a 5-star player, is Michael Fusi. Now, Chad, you and I, we've talked some about Michael Fusi. Mm-hmm. He is a big-time offensive line prospect. I think it's a Texas-Oklahoma battle, personally. He's doing the visit, right? He's doing all the visits. He's going to take a visit. I think he was supposed to go to Oregon this weekend. It didn't pan out, and he's looking at A&M. He's looking at USC. He's looking at Ohio State. But this kid kind of went back and forth in the fall. It seemed like every weekend he was either at Texas or Oklahoma. So I think we may be looking for a kid from Louisville, which is kind of OU territory over the years. Because over the last 20 years, they've certainly been more active in recruiting the Louisville high school program more than Texas has. And they've had more success. I think it's a Texas OU battle. I think it's going to come down to those two schools. If I had to handicap it, I might call it 55-45 OU over Texas. And let me tell you why. I can't remember what week it was of the season last year, but it was one of the weekends when Texas had a pretty high profile. It might have been like the Kansas State game or something like that. But there was a weekend where Texas was playing a home game and OU was playing a home game. And look, Louisville kind of right between the two, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe a smidge closer to Oklahoma because it's in the north end of the Metroplex. He had the chance to go see Texas in a good game or OU in a pretty crappy game, if I remember correctly. And he chose Oklahoma. And I just remember thinking, okay, well, he had a decision to make. And oftentimes that stuff matters. Now, look, Colin Simmons was playing Alabama, And he went to LSU because they were playing, I think, Southern, and he just kind of wanted to go see the bands. So
Grambling right.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, sometimes it doesn't exactly work out that way. It may be kind of a true 50-50, but Texas not in a bad position at all right now with Fusi. And, Kyle Flood's number one prospect, I think, in the state this year. They've had him on campus a bunch. There's no doubt Texas fans, trust me, if Texas doesn't win this recruiting battle, don't tell me next February that it was by design, that, Texas didn't really want him. No, they want him. Fusi is as much of a gotta-have prospect as anybody in the state this year.
All the way up at number 4 on the list. All right, so as we roll through the top 10, let me see if we got anything else here before we get there. Real quick, a comment about out-of-state stuff. Somebody commented earlier, if other states come take our players, we'll do the same. It only makes sense. You just mentioned these are 2 out-of-state teams, LSU and Ohio State, that had the number 1 and 2 guys in the state. We've been talking about it for years. I'm fascinated by the idea of who's coming into these living rooms, but now catch Texas A&M, Oklahoma. This is the first cycle where they're going to be truly in the SEC. These kids will get a look at whatever that first season's going to look like, right? Of all those teams in the SEC together. So give me your sense for, do you think the power of Day, Kelly, DeBoer, let's give him that respect because he's at Alabama, Kirby Smart, do you think that power to get into the state of Texas is about to change, get better, get worse, stay the same? Like, what do you think is going to happen with that part of it?
I think as time moves on, this should all be really good for Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. I think there's more of a net win in this for all 3 schools than there is the possibility of, it should only get better. So, I think that as these schools get established in the SEC and become kind of renowned for being in the SEC, I think more doors will open up to them. And you'll, I think, find inside these, I think inside the state of Oklahoma, when they've got big time guys, they'll have there have been times when Oklahoma the state has had big time prospects, and those guys have gone to SEC schools as opposed to staying inside the state of Oklahoma and going to Oklahoma or Oklahoma State for that matter. Mm-hmm. But I think there's always nobody ever asks Oklahoma State, how'd you let that kid get out? It's always a question. It's for the University of Oklahoma. I think the leverage in recruiting for all 3 schools only gets better.
Gotcha. If you want to throw a chat in, we will certainly take that. Obviously, the super chats go right to the head of the line. We're working our way through the top 20 guys in the state of Texas. This is for the 2025 class. Started with Dorian Moore. We're working our way down. All right, what are we to number 5?
Faster through some of these guys, but the top guys at the list deserve a little more discussion than some of the guys when we get down towards the bottom. Number 5 on the list, and a guy that's just outside of 5-star range, is Andrew Marsh, Chad, out of Katy, Jordan. For a long time, it looked like Texas was the leader. Matter of fact, if you'd asked me to put in a future cast last year, I'd have put it on Texas. Now it looks so. Last weekend, he chose to go to A&M instead of Texas. So, and then it turns out that his sister is an A&M grad.
Yeah, I read that over the weekend. Okay.
And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, well, he's got family ties. He's choosing in a pickoff. He chose A&M over Texas as it relates to the junior day. Now, that may not necessarily mean everything. He's been to Texas a bunch, but he will have left this January period without visiting Texas, and he has visited A&M. Does feel like a slight advantage. A&M, the Longhorns are still in it, but that's kind of the status of that guy. He didn't make it into Austin in January. You would have liked to have had – he could have just as easily visited A&M this weekend and gone to Texas last weekend
And that's not what happened. Gotcha. All right. So you want to roll through the rest of the top 10 here and just kind of give us your shots on each?
Yeah, some of this stuff can go real easy. Dorian Moore, cornerback out of Conroe. He's from Ohio. Ohio State is his leader. He's looking at a couple of other schools, but at the end of the day, he may just go home.
Yeah, that is a weird one. How many times do the Ohio guys end up in Conroe? Catch? How many times does that happen?
Well, you'll remember though, like Adrien Wilson had this as an issue.
Yeah, true.
These Ohio people have to stop moving to Texas and letting their kids be badass football players, only to have them go back to Ohio.
True.
But again, there won't be another kid on this there will be nobody else that we talk about where we say, well, he moved in from this state and he wants to, like, it's just kind of a random deal. Number 7 on the list. Now, this one's an interesting one. DJ Sanders. He's from Belleville. He is a borderline 5-star defensive tackle. This is a guy that is exactly the kind of guy that Texas was not signing under Bo Davis, that by God, they need to start signing. This is a difference-making super blue chip defensive tackle, and yet thus far, it just doesn't seem like he cares about recruiting. He hasn't been doing the junior day stuff. His team played deep into the playoffs. He played a lot of high school football this year, so he just hasn't done a lot. It's almost certainly going to be like Texas, Texas A&M, LSU, Oklahoma, and yet does feel like it's a little early to kind of get a feel for what's happening there. I think in March, when the dead period ends and suddenly guys are visiting schools either on junior days or they're going to practices or whatever, guys start making their spring visit rounds, DJ Sanders will be one of the guys above anybody else in the state to keep an eye on, because he will eventually get face first into recruiting. It hasn't happened yet. The school that's able to get him on campus first, make a big first impression, get him on campus 2 or 3 times, will probably be the school that ends up winning there. When we move on to number 8 on the list, Adrien Wilson is committed to Oregon. The Aggies are really making a push. Matter of fact, I think the Aggies have done all of the heavy lifting when it comes to breaking this guy's Oregon wall down. The Longhorns have had him on campus. You could make a case that maybe his recruitment is just getting started in earnest right now, that he committed to Oregon. It's been kind of a placeholder, but he is visiting other schools, Longhorns included. So stay tuned for Adrien Wilson. How to completely handicap his recruitment is probably difficult to do. There's a lot of badass receivers in the state of Texas this year. We've already talked about Dorian Moore as a guy. Adrien Wilson's another. Khalid Lockett is ranked number 9 on my list, or on the Rivals list, excuse me. Ohio State and LSU are the current top 2. Aggies are probably 3rd. The Longhorns are somewhere in there, but they got some work to do to make up ground on Khalid Lockett. And number 10 is Michael Riles, who, of all of the guys inside the state top 10, the defensive end out of Port Arthur Memorial, last on the list of this top 10, he is probably the one guy that if you were to say who's the Longhorn lean of all leans on this list, you'd probably give Texas the bigger percentage with Riles than anybody else in the top 10. Now, his situation is not unlike a lot of these guys, right? They're still A&M. Matter of fact, I think it'll probably be a Texas A&M battle for Riles when it's all said and done. Mainly because he's looking at a lot of in-state schools. Like Texas Tech might be 3rd. And it's like, okay, well, if his recruitment's going to be that regional, then it's almost certainly going to, I think, be a Texas versus Texas A&M battle.
Gotcha. All right, Catch, before we leave this top 10 discussion, Blake, if we could throw it up there one more time, I want you to look at these top 10, Catch, and I'm going to ask it this way. If you could whisper in the ear of one offensive and one defensive player and get them to consider Texas and get them to come to Austin and get them to really listen to Sark, give me one on each side of the ball, the wish list for Texas fans, an early Santa Catch, if you will.
I mean, look, to me, the guys in the top 4, and look, they all have 5-star ratings. So they're just separate than everybody else. I would pick a guy. Pick any two, honestly. You could make the case, though, that more so than 5-star Devin Sanchez, and more so than 5-star Jonah Williams, you could make a case that DJ Sanders is maybe the most important defensive recruit in the state this year because of positional value.
Right.
A borderline 5-star D tackle doesn't come through the state every single year. In fact, the only state top 100 guy in all positions, top 100 from the state of Texas last year for most of the year was Alex January. Texas got him, but he's only like a high 3-star guy. Now, I think he's better than that. I think he's a legitimate 4-star, but this guy's such a cut above that if I had to whisper in one guy's ear, I will confess I don't think he's a 5-star guy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ.
Dog disagrees.
When the Weimaraner wants to sound like a hound dog, she can howl.
Hey, hound dogs love a good D tackle. I mean, they'll let you know.
It's like watching the Fox and the Hound. Her name's Copper. She's a hound dog. Thank you. I shouldn't have done that. That
no, you shouldn't.
Only makes it more problematic.
I can do that. They can barely hear me, I think.
She's getting closer to the door. Hey, shut up. So those are the top 3 defensive guys. One's a corner. One's a hybrid safety linebacker. The other's a D tackle. I think the NFL would tell us the D tackle, if all things are kind of even, they're so hard to find that maybe the D tackle is the guy. It's close. Those would be the 3. On offense, probably Fusi, because Sark's going to get wide receivers all the time. Yeah. All the time. I mean, they don't have to be from the state of Texas. They don't have to be from the high school ranks. They can come from the portal. In fact, there's a part of me that thinks that Sarkisian is going to take 2 or 3 wide receivers in the portal every year. Because why wouldn't you if you could?
Yeah, you're probably right.
It's like, oh, well, this guy's only got 1 year of eligibility left, but he might be a first-round draft pick. Come on. So nobody's going to worry about wide receiver recruiting at all.
Gotcha. Couple quick chats here, Catch. Let's make sure we clarify here. Somebody says 2025 recruiting looks like a mini disaster right now, but Texas has time to creep back up. I don't believe Catch ever said mini disaster. Did you say?
But Chad, people listen to that, and it was one guy after another that at this moment has got like his own little thing going on, and Texas isn't at the full. Blake, put it back up real quick. Sorry. I've got dogs wrestling now. It's party time at the Ketchum household. We don't know what's going to happen with top 2. But Texas is squarely in it for 4, 7, and 10. So there's 3.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of other guys where we're talking about Marsh, Wilson are guys that Texas is very much seemingly in it right now. You got a couple of guys in Sanchez and Brew that you're probably just not going to be involved with. And then you've got work to do with Moore, Williams, and Khalid Lockett. Like, you can fit these guys into tiers. And look, I think they probably, again, they lead for Riles, who I've got in that group with Fusi and Sanders. It's not a disaster. This year, Texas signed 3 players. The difference between what I'm suggesting in 2025 as things currently stand is this year, Texas only got 3 of the top 10, but they got number 1 as a 5-star. They got number 3 or 4 who was a 5-star. And then they got like the number. So they only got 3 of the top 25, but it may have been 3 of the top 5.
Yeah, good quality.
So 3 of the top 25.
Right. Big time quality, if not the quantity.
Yeah. And so, and look, that sounds not great, but if you close on the 3 that I mentioned, 4, 6, and 10, and then you add another 1 or 2 from there, now you're right where you want to be. These are really slim margins. But yeah, man, Texas has got some work to do. Like, duh. And that is at the crux of everything that we've been talking about today, Chad, is that if we have a really real conversation about, hey, let's talk about the guys and what's going on in their recruitments. There's not a whole bunch of them where you're like, Texas is the leader. We think they're going to get a commitment from him. And when you don't say that, instinctively, a lot of, you know what people hear? Fire!
The sky is falling.
We haven't said, why did I do that? Sorry, dog.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. These 4 o'clock shows can be, my wife's not home right now. Remember I told you?
That's problematic.
Now I can compliment my wife.
Because she takes care of the dogs.
She does. She makes sure the dogs are taken care of during the shows when there's an issue. Let's go through 11 through 20 real quick. I do think the tone changes. One of the things, though, that we also, you talk about, like, other than Marsh, Texas didn't get a lot of the top 10 on campus for the junior day. The good news about 11 through 20 is there's a lot of guys on this list. We're still trying to confirm with Ty Haywood. I don't think Jason wasn't sure that he visited. I want to say somebody told me last week that he did, but 11 Ty Haywood, 12 Keoti Armstrong, who I think is rated way too low. Number 13, Riley Pettyjohn. Number 15, Lamont Rogers. Number 17, Chad Wolford. Number 18, Michael Terry. Number 19, Kamorian Morgan. And number 20, Ja'Cory. They were all on campus. 11, 12, well, we think 11. Not sure on 11, but 12, 13, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, all visited for Texas Junior Days.
Okay.
And in that group, I don't think Armstrong really has a leader. I think I think A&M was the leader. And then Ty Anthony's
Yeah. Now. Sounds like the Royal Rumble's going on in your house now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's Flash! It's Flash from Smokey and the Bandit! He hasn't been in a Rumble since 89!
Guys, please. Now the little one wants to get in with the random Arf!
Yeah. I'm sorry. Fred was Smokey the Bandit. Flash is Dukes the Hazzard. I mixed up my Basset Hounds. My bad. My bad, dog people. Sorry.
I mean, you can either laugh or lose your mind.
That's it.
So you wouldn't necessarily say that Texas is the outright leader with all of these guys, but I think they're probably the leader with McKinney linebacker Riley Pettyjohn. I think they're right at the top of the list with Lamont Rogers. I think with Chad Wolford, number 17, Michael Terry, number 18, Morgan, number 19. I think those are players that Texas could all lead with. So 11 through 20 is certainly, just by the activity of these guys were on campus a week ago, things I think start getting a lot more uplifting when you look at this group. They're different sounding conversations than the first 10. The problem is everybody realizes the first 10 are the most valuable. And it has nothing to do with anything personal with these other guys. Although, look, I think Armstrong is good enough to be in the top 10. I think Rogers is good enough to be in the top 10. Haywood as well. It's actually a really good year. I think this is going to be a year where when we talk about the super blue chips in the state of Texas or guys that are close to that, I think we really are looking at a 15 or 16 year instead of somewhere between 8 and 10. That's good for Texas. It gives them more chances to find guys to just collect in the bucket. But yeah, I mean, of these guys, I think the ones that really stand out to me, Haywood at 11 is really good. Again, he's another guy. Now, he visited A&M for a junior day this past weekend and was supposed to make it to Texas for the Texas junior day. I think it's going to be between those two schools and throw in Oklahoma. I wonder if the weather last weekend wasn't a problem for Haywood not being able to make it in. Armstrong at number 12 is one of my favorite tight ends in the last few years. Chad, full grown ass man.
Yeah.
When you see pictures of Keone Armstrong and you say SEC tight end, you get it right away. You're just like, oh. And the other thing about Armstrong in the history of recruiting in the state of Texas, 8 players from the state of Texas. Here's your stat of the day, Chad. In the last 20 years, 8 different prospects at the tight end position inside the state of Texas had a ranking as good as Armstrong. And 6 of the 8 were drafted and played in the NFL.
Wow.
The state of Texas doesn't get big-time tight ends. It's almost like an average of one every 2 or 3 years.
But
this
when
year, when they do, yes.
Yeah, look out.
And Armstrong, if you ask me, hey, what had to happen in order for this guy not to make it to the NFL? Either A, he lost his leg in like a horrible bass fishing accident.
Okay.
Right? For you, Jerry Maguire. It's one for you. It's one for the youngins out there that love the movie Jerry Maguire. And then number 2 is like, well, like, you know, remember in Star Trek 2 when they put that thing in the ear of Chekhov and the other dude that died? Did you ever see that?
I've never seen Star Trek 2, no.
Oh, and you got to see the Wrath of Khan.
I'm a Star Wars guy, Jeff. I'm not a Star Trek guy.
I'm a Star Wars guy, but I've seen Wrath of Khan. They take these little creepy crawlers out of a tank.
Yeah.
Fish tank that they've turned into a creepy crawler tank. Okay. And they crawl in their ears when they're little bitty babies. And then they grow to be big, like slug looking things. And they wrap themselves around your brain and they kill you.
Oh, okay.
It'd either be the bass fishing accident or someone put a creepy crawler in his brain and made him go crazy. Those are the only 2 things that stopping that kid from playing in the NFL.
Okay.
So I love the guy.
It's a long way to. That's a long way to go to tell people you like a tight end. I think
I'm stressing how much I like Armstrong.
I'll tell you, Catch. I got to see him in person on this last junior day, and this picture is taken from my eye level. And look at how he's just looking down at me. Like he's a big dude.
Yeah, looks like his hands are really small too.
Yeah,
real tiny hands.
Freaking like, long arms and big hands. Like
when he slaps you in the face, it feels like you've been hit with a frying pan.
Yeah, Kristen Wiig on Saturday Night Live. He is not. He's got some big hands. Big hands.
I think when you go back to the top 20 list, look, I love Lamont Rogers. Texas has him at number 15. I think I've got him at number 3 right now. I mean, I think he's a 5-star level talent. It's certainly on the cusp of that. I think what's really interesting about this second 10 is you got a couple of offensive linemen. You've got a tight end. You've got a linebacker. You've got multiple defensive ends. Yes, there are the prerequisite, how many 3 wide receivers and a running back. So like the thing that Texas is famous for is lots of skill guys. It's just always going to be, it's why you don't, as great as Dorian Moore is, it's a state that everywhere you look, there's a wide receiver that you can grab that may play on Sundays down the road. And the other thing about wide receiver and Dorian Moore, there's no position in the state that's as combustible with misses as the wide receiver position. It's bananas. Now, look, it started to change the trends in the last 4 or 5 years because you've had Jalen Waddle come through as a 5-star at Alabama. You had Garrett Wilson go to Ohio State. You've had, one of the other Ohio State wide receivers whose name, Jackson
Smith-Njigba.
Yeah. Sorry, just they've had so many that I couldn't keep track of all of the first round. You had him as a 5-star. So you're starting to get, this is a position that's starting to become a little bit more of a sure thing than it used to be. But in general, it's still a position where a lot of guys miss. A lot of guys just don't pan out for whatever reason. I think about a guy like Damon Demas at Texas A&M, who was a 5-star and I rated as the number 1 prospect in the state a few years ago. Just an incredible athlete and athletic specimen. And I don't know if the kid's getting out of JUCO ball. So, it happens there. That's it. I mean, that's the conversation about the top 20 that we probably need to have. If anybody has any specific questions, we'll certainly take them. I'm just content that the dogs aren't barking at this exact moment.
So Catch Ed threw this in on the chat. Texas gets 1 in the top 10 and crush it with 11 through 20. If that's true, I'll tell you what if it ends up being, what if it's 1 out of the top 10 and 4 or 5 out of that bottom group? Is that good enough for you? Is that going to be like a, whoa, okay.
I mean, look, we need to stop with this. Is it good enough for me? I may never be pleased. I may always be the guy that's looking for ways to get more, to do more, to get more. That would mean probably 1 or 2 of the super blue chip prospects in the state. That's not good enough. Now, look, for me, like if you're Texas, and I think Sarkisian would agree, look, they got to get Blake, put that list of the top 10 back up. Steve Sarkisian would tell you, these are the guys they got to get. These are the guys.
How many does he want? How many would make him happy? Half?
Half you're talking my language.
Would 4 make him happy?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
3'd make him smile.
I mean, it kind of depends. Are they going to kick ass out of state?
Well, what would 2 make him do?
Not happy.
Okay.
2's not good enough.
2 makes him look somewhere else.
If all you got was Dorian Moore and Michael Riles, that's not good enough. And that has nothing to say about the quality of those 2 players who are both badasses, and one of them would be the number 1 player in the state right now. If you're Texas and you're at the level that you are right now, you have to do better.
Okay.
Tom Herman did better.
All right. Fighting words.
Well, no, I'm trying to just put some perspective on it. It's Tom Herman made it work. That wasn't that. Let's not act like Tom Herman was pre-SEC dominance. He was doing that with crappy teams. Not in the SEC, he doesn't have nearly no NIL. Texas is in the SEC. They're a top 4 program in America right now, and they've got NIL money to spend. There's just no reason for Texas not to do better. Texas and Texas will do better. I'm convinced of it, but there's work to do. They're not there yet. The map doesn't suggest that that's about to happen, but I think that they will. Now, will they get to the levels that I think where they really should be? Probably not, and probably because some of the dynamics in the state this year include one of the guys that you'd like to get is from the state of Ohio. Another guy's got A&M family that have gone through the school. I mean, there's just one thing you didn't really hear me say in any of that, Chad, was this guy's an A&M or a Texas legacy. Or This guy's mom went to Texas, or this guy has a brother that's at Texas. Like in the top 10, those advantages don't exist. And normally there's usually one or two guys that you just have a built-in advantage in, usually for both Texas and Texas A&M. There's usually a couple of guys that there's just built-in advantages in. And maybe A&M has that with Jonah Williams and Texas doesn't. That the difference between the two right now is there's a weird little built-in A&M advantage for Jonah Williams that Texas doesn't have with anybody else in that group.
All right, so Catch, as we get ready to kind of close it up here, let me ask a kind of a general question. As you've been talking about the Texas fan reaction and the interactions you've been having on orangebloods.com. Obviously, go check out all the stuff at orangebloods.com. We're getting closer to signing day and everything else that goes with it. Would you tell a Texas fan that in terms of the reaction, it sounds like it might be just about balancing out the reactions for you? It sounds like you're telling me the reactions can just get so extreme that it turns into either, oh my God, you're saying that the program is crap, or don't worry, our head coach is smart enough to know that you don't want talent in the state of Texas. Are you ultimately telling a Texas fan they need to take a breath and find middle ground when it comes to how they process all this?
Never live in the extremes, ever. Find a comfortable middle ground. You're going to do your best work. You're going to see things more clearly, most clearly. Yes, it's as simple as we're talking about fine margins here. Again, Texas is recruiting at a really high level, borderline elite level. How do they get from top 5 to that next step? They gotta win a few more than they've been winning in the last couple of years in state, or you got to double what you're doing out of state. And that's on paper, that's a harder thing to ask for than presumably handling your business inside the state of Texas. The one thing I would say, and this will be my final thought, unless you have any further questions or anybody wants to throw in any questions that we'll hit before we get on out of here. If we take Texas out of the equation, Chad, did you notice if one school or the other seemed to be doing great?
One school or the other in terms of, just anybody you mentioned?
Yeah, like of the top 10, there wasn't really a theme
No,
oh my God, what's going on? Nobody's sitting there going, what's going on at A&M? Why are they just kicking It's not like OU or A&M or even LSU, or I'll tell you what we didn't hear in that list that I bet eventually becomes a thing. Georgia's going to come in swinging a big stick eventually.
Right.
And they're going to say, hey, we're really interested in you. Come visit us. And last year that was one 5-star and one borderline 5-star kid that Texas wasn't able to get. The Texas might have even finished second had those recruitments gone on further, although maybe not. I mean, Justin Williams was certainly looking at Oregon. Texas would have had its work cut out for it. But I tend to give Texas a lot of benefit of the doubt that they can make up ground with a lot of guys. Georgia will come in. At least you don't think you have to worry about the Alabama factor this year. It's not Saban, no matter if it is still Alabama. So it's not like there's one school that's doing all of the damage and they've got to overcome that. I wonder if it would be easier if it was just that. It's like, it's all like A&M. Give us 4 months. We'll change all of that. I almost think you'd rather have that going on right now than it's all just different, and Ohio State with one kid and Oklahoma for another and A&M for another and LSU for another. And, it gets a little trickier. Your head starts spinning with regards to what do we need to do to make a real massive move where we're changing guys at the top of the recruiting rankings in fairly large doses.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with those teams from a early on in the discussion, Catch, as you were going through the Texas stuff and kind of the metrics that you were setting out in terms of top 20. Gary threw in this chat about, this is by those metrics, what happened to A&M. Maybe I'll use that to ask this question, but in terms of Texas A&M, and let's throw Oklahoma in there. Again, back to these 3 schools that are now going to try to figure out how to live in the SEC together at the same time. How are you going to look at those three schools as we go forward here for like, what are the things you're looking for? And then I guess to talk to Gary, sort of what has happened to A&M since that 22 class in your mind?
What has happened to A&M is that Jimbo dropped the ball. I mean, they had it set up to do big things, and they were lacking a quarterback settling in and taking off and kind of doing what Quinn Ewers did this year, right? Not win the Heisman, but play at a level where if everything else around you is playing really, really well, you can win at a high level. That's it. A&M's roster is still one of the best in college football. They still have a top 6 or 7 roster in college football. They're still waiting on the quarterback position. And maybe that happens this year with a healthy Connor Wigman. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll have to see. I tend to think if you told me right now that Wigman plays 12 games next year, I think there's a very good chance that you see a much improved Texas A&M on the whole. Even with all of the losses that they've had on the roster, they still have – I think the scary thing for A&M right now is they've got to – they are – for this, like right now they're living off of older classes. And in the last 2 classes, and especially the 2024 class, if they don't sign Terry Bussey, who is at Georgia this weekend, they will have finished this class with 0 super blue chips. In-state, out-of-state, 0. Right. And so, you know, that's where I think if you're A&M, you're concerned is that 2024 is just a big old dud. The only hope they have is that a kid from a really small town sticks with A&M in part because socially it's the closest thing that maybe he feels like his hometown is. But, you know, if Athens is able to convince him or LSU is able to convince him that Baton Rouge just isn't too crazy for him, like Texas, A&M's got to get back on that horse and start getting after it again. And it will be the real question about Elko all year long. Although he's not listed in the Rivals rankings, but A&M picked up a top 10 commitment from my rankings early on this weekend. You know, we were to look at my top 10, you'd have Moore going to LSU at 1, Sanchez 2 going to Ohio State. I've got Dejon Petaway, a corner from Katy, who committed to A&M this weekend. And like I said, I've got Lance Jackson on my list. I'm a big fan of Keandre Barker, a running back from the Woodlands who's committed to Penn State. My list from before the season looks a little bit different than the Rivals list, but not too different. There's a lot of the same names on it. But yeah, that's that.
Gotcha. All right. I do feel kind of bad. We didn't even get to, you just said Woodlands. That reminded me. We didn't even get to that name in the Woodlands yet.
Oh, and I don't have it in me now to talk about that story.
Nope. We're going to get there. You know what? Wednesday. How about Wednesday? Wednesday in the recruiting hour. We'll talk about that name in the Woodlands that everybody needs to know about. Because, hey, is he a class of 25 guy catch?
Yes.
Then we need to be talking about him because he's in this next wave of players that we'll be discussing. Don't worry. We will get into that. So real quick, if Terry Bussey do you think Terry Bussey is going to make his choice National Signing Day? Or does it go past that? Probably. If he doesn't pick A&M, what does he do? You have a clear second?
I thought he was going to flip to LSU, but Georgia's – look, man, I remember I had a source tell me during the summer that if Georgia's in on a guy –
look out.
You probably won't see Texas recruiting that guy full on, like a lot, because
right.
Georgia can out NIL A&M.
Right. There's very few things in recruiting that would cause Texas to pause, but maybe the Bulldogs are that thing or one of those things.
I mean, you know, when Saban was bitching about A&M He was really also bitching about Georgia. He just couldn't say that.
Right. He didn't want to tell that group Kirby was the guy, so he picked Jimbo.
He picked out because they're far enough away that the collateral damage is minimal. But the things that he was upset about Texas A&M, Georgia does even better. So, like, I guess, you know what? I'll say LSU. But, man, don't discount Kirby and the Dogs. Don't ever use the word discount with Kirby and the Dogs.
They do not believe in the discount when it comes to NIL. They are coming with a full-on Bulldog NIL discussion. All right, there's your recruiting hour for today. We'll have an Outsiders episode tonight in the 9 o'clock hour. So join us for that. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and getting your notifications for Orange Bloods Live. Thanks to Blake, the super producer, for all of his great work. Before we get out of here, let's also give Specs a little love because they bring us the Specs Chat.
No matter what you're needing, Specs same-day delivery can save the day with our Specs app or online shopping. From world-class wines to hard-to-find spirits and craft beers to gourmet foods, delicious snacks, and spectacular sweets. It's Specs. Cheers to savings.
Hey, Chad, can I just ask a question?
Yes, sir.
What does this mean? I'm trying to keep up in the Specs Chat.
Text guy too. He is hated in the state of Texas, according to Catch. I don't know what that means. I don't know. It sounds like a reference to some player, but I don't know.
Texas guy 2, very quickly. Who's that? Who's hated? Who did I say is hated in the state of Texas?
Yeah, I do not know. I saw that out of the side of just kind of.
Is that Jimbo?
In the periphery.
Couldn't be Jimbo.
I don't know. Maybe it's a coach. I don't know if it's a coach reference or a player reference. I do not know. So text guy
because
too.
Broke to Pay Attention says, did Catch say why Sark is hated in Texas?
Oh, wait, maybe that's it.
But text guy said no. So
no, but that made me maybe that. Okay, let's go through this. I missed that text guy too. Did Catch say why Sark is hated in Texas? Text guy 2 says no. So maybe the person he's referencing is Sark?
That Sark is hated? That I said Sark?
No. That is not what he said. That's not what we're talking about. No. Needing to maybe ramp up the recruiting inside the state of Texas and the head coach being hated in the state of Texas are two completely different discussions. We're having the first one, not the second one.
Sometimes, Chad, you do these shows, and when they're over with, you think to yourself, you know what? The world is better because we did that show. People are better informed. People learned a little something. I feel like this is just wasted breath that we did a show today, and that nothing that we actually said is the thing that people heard. It's like my wife again.
Here's what it is, Catch. You and I are both Cowboys fans, and we always talk about this is a circus tent thing. Longhorn fans are wired kind of like Cowboys fans. When they go to emotions, they don't go to this emotion. They either go to that one or that one. It's one of the two, right? Like that's when back in the radio days, we used to talk about every caller is either talking a national championship or fire the head coach. It's the extremes of everything. I think that, to me, ends up being the theme. I used to say that Aggies can't be realistic, and sometimes Texas fans are too realistic. And in the end, it's sort of a two-part. They can be real realistic, but then they get really intense about their realism, and they go one way or the other. Aggies go extreme, but Aggies don't go negative extreme. Aggies are programmed to go super positive with everything. Texas fans will go both ways with it, and they pull so hard in one direction. It's like, are you saying we suck? No. Whoa, easy. Calm down.
It's an amazing thing to have come into today's show with the aim of I'll set the record straight.
Mm-hmm.
People will have a better understanding of what we're talking about. And then at the end of it, that just didn't happen.
It's okay. See, what we'll do is we'll just keep slowly progressing. By the way, real quick, Catch, Cotton's got something for you here at the end of the show. Just make sure you watch your tone. All right.
I know.
Just make sure.
I know. You're right.
Cotton says Aggies flow with the Colts. There you go. There it is. There it is. The difference between a circus and a cult. There are two. Maybe that explains it better than any of us ever could. One's a circus. One's a cult.
Yes. You know what? Let's wrap it up because there's a black hole that I'll take us down to. Why are the shows ending today with me policing myself and not saying something extra just because I know that then the rails will come off and the show will never end?
There you go. Just save all those kind of comments for Wednesday when we talk about that certain guy in the 4 o'clock hour, and we'll have a lot of fun then. That's when the next recruiting hour will happen, 4 o'clock on Wednesday. We got the Outsiders tonight at 9. And speaking of 9 a.m. is your old-fashioned show with Anwar Richardson in the morning. So be sure to check that out. Like, subscribe, get those notifications for Orange Bloods Live. Thanks to Blake, the super producer, for all his great work. And until 4 o'clock on Wednesday, this is the recruiting hour. That is Jeff Ketchum, always trying to set the record straight. I'm Chad Hastings, and this is Orange Blood